Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Rapoport.
What do you got in there? You know you got a star up there? Did you know it? It's called the Rapoport Academy. And it has about 131 kids in it. It's just a school where you walk in and you know that it's filled with love. I have a joke with them, you know, who can hold me the tightest? A little tighter, just a little bit tighter. Yeah, that's better. I'm the child of Russian Jewish immigrant parents. And my father was in the Russian Revolution of 1905, was sent to Siberia for life and escaped and came to the United States in 1913. I was raised with poor parents, poor economically, and yet we didn't know we were poor because we had love in the house and we had books in the house. I walked with him with his push cart where he was calling on the homes of Mexican families. And there'd be a man, wife, and 4 or 5 kids selling pecans for $1 a day on a dirt floor there. And every time we walked to that house, he'd shake his finger in my face and say, "That's injustice. You've got to fight against that all your life."
Bernard Rapoport founded the American Life Insurance Company in 1951. He began the company with a $25,000 bank loan, and 50 years later, had built a company worth $560 million.
The building of American income was a 50-year enterprise. We knew we'd get rich, sure, but not quick, and that's the way it proved to be. So when we sold the company, we took half the money and put it in the foundation. I was introduced as a self-made man. The real truth is, of course, no one's self-made, and of course, we all owe so much to so many for all the nice and good things that have happened in our life. I judge success by what people contribute to ameliorating the quality of life of citizens in our country, or in the world. What I care about is that when you have a society where too few have too much and too many have too little, that's not a sustainable society. I went to the drugstore the other day. I have a heart condition. I needed 4 pills. You know what the bill was? $1,000. So I said to the druggist, I said, I just can't understand. Now, what if I didn't have the money? He said, well, you couldn't have them. I said, well, I can't live without them. And he had no further comment. I don't want a society where I can have better health than you. I want a society where no one is going to say no to something a person needs because they don't have money. When I'm political, I'm very idealistic. And when I am philanthropic, I'm very, very charitable. And when I'm in business, I'm a predator, but I hope a civilized one. I love business. I really do. I just think that it's possible to build a successful business and have a sense of social responsibility.
I can hear Bee's voice even now saying to me, "Now, David, you know that they don't all read Hebrew. So you have to explain what that Zion Lamed after my name is. And David, I want you to tell them all. I don't want to hear a cell phone for the next hour while my friends are together celebrating. So let me ask you to turn them off and to explain that these letters, which stand for Zichrono Livracha, mean, may Bee's memory ever be for a blessing." Let me welcome you here to this service of memory and hope, this extraordinary celebration of a remarkable life. A giant for justice, larger than life, who lived with gusto and laughter and strode across the the landscape of American politics for 2 generations, pursuing a vision of justice, peace, compassion, and decency, Bernard B. Rapoport has left us. There is an empty place in the hearts of all of us gathered here today. But in our coming together to celebrate his life, in our love for B and his family, we are comforted, inspired, ennobled. Those gathered here reflect the remarkable diversity of B's life and the immense range of the passions of his heart. A proud American and Texan, a proud Jew, a passionate liberal, a passionate Democrat, a lover of Israel, a courageous and outspoken champion of labor, a champion of quality education, health care, justice for all. Let me ask that you join me in the booklets in reading the words of the 23rd Psalm from his tradition and all of ours, from which caring people have found such comfort and hope from time immemorial. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord. All of us who are gathered here to celebrate B's life and to mourn his death are evidence of his outside capacity for optimism, for causes championed, for abiding political alliances, for deep and lasting friendships, for his beloved Audrey and for him. To give voice to that boundless capacity, we will now hear remembrances from Ron and Abby and Emily, each of whom B was so very, very proud, as well as a remarkable array of our nation's greatest public servants, representing the world of politics, of labor, of social justice advocacy, including a president who shared so many of B's values and his love of life. Indeed, if B is looking down, I suspect that heaven is hearing that rollicking laughter of his as he delights in these being the very selections that he would have made. I turn now to his Ron.
Unlike Rabbi Saperstein, I'm sort of not used to looking out at the bright lights, but it comes of living in Williamsburg, I guess. But on behalf of my mother, my wife, Patricia, Abby, and Emily, I'd really like to welcome you here and thank you for your attendance and thank you for the prayers and warm thoughts you've shared with us over the last 6 weeks. I want to especially thank those who have agreed to do eulogies, President Clinton, Speaker Pelosi, Senators Daschle and Harkin, Bob Borisage, and John Sweeney. Knowing how much John Sweeney wanted to attend, we are really as sorry as he is that he has been unable to do so. Although there is great sadness in the loss of my father, this is an opportunity, as Rabbi Saperstein said, to celebrate an almost perfectly lived life, a life that he lived his own inimitable way until the end, largely because of my mother's assiduous care. She was certainly always there guarding and protecting. My father really never changed throughout the time I knew him. He only became more B. As such, I think he would take particular pride in the fact that until the very end, he was active, productive, and himself. The weekend before he passed away, he ran the Audrey and Bernard Rapoport Foundation meeting in Waco. And 2 days before his passing, he was at the office, working a full-out 8-hour day, changing the world, connecting with friends, and always, always flirting with his secretary and any other female who he could find. I want to touch briefly on just one aspect of his personality, one that's particularly meaningful to me. As anyone who ever met him knows, for my father, relationships, dialogue, community, and learning were all important. And this hotel is a proper place for his memorial because it serves so often as the setting for the creation and experience of all of these. For more than 50 years, he walked through this hotel lobby, enthusiastic and excited to greet and talk to anyone he encountered, whether he knew them or not. Always on the way to his breakfast table. And here he delighted, as many of you know and many of you were part of, in holding court, connecting and reconnecting with people he loved, carrying on, at a bare minimum, 3 conversations at once, always questioning the people around him to learn something new, and bringing people who didn't know one another together so that they could work together to save the world. It was a treat to behold and a real insight into who he was. I think his commitment to relationships, dialogue, and learning is why, as many of you have experienced, a conversation on the telephone with him usually ended up with the other person still holding the phone and shouting, "B, are you still there?" And of course he wasn't. He didn't say goodbye, I think, because for him, the relationship, the conversation, the dialogue, the opportunity to learn was not finished. It wasn't over. It was just interrupted until it was continued at some later time, as it almost always would be. And usually, as if it had never been interrupted. Going to temple with my folks, I was always struck by the lines in our prayer book about those who had passed away. They still live on earth in the acts of goodness they performed and in the hearts of those who love them. In that sense, my Father is here with us, witnessing, relishing, and delighting in this wonderful ceremony.
My grandfather always liked my poetry, and so one of his wishes had been that I would write a poem to read, and so this is my poem for him. I wake to the sound of shouting. I am instantly alarmed, until I realize it is simply the age-old sound of my grandfather and father playing dominoes downstairs. For them, games are more about the art of bewailing your opponent's luck and your lack of it than anything else. Family is not meant to be a quiet entity, but one of laughter and arguing, teasing and joy. After all, there is silence only among thieves, my grandfather has told me, since I was small. Tantalizing smells accompany the wafted shouts as I wander down the stairs, sleep still falling from my eyes. My mother must be cooking. It will surely be something wondrous that will silence us all, at least for as long as it takes us to consume it. Soon conversation will raise its head again. Politics, mixed with religion, mixed with the names of philosophers, that will meld into one incomprehensible mass when I try to remember them later. Past, present, and future are never separate. My grandparents' exciting adventures through the years, that which they are doing, that which they will do. He tells us whatever current joke he has memorized. The telling is less than ideal. The glee with which he tells it is infectious. My grandfather is awash in enthusiasm, his permanent state, as he asks Abby and I what we are learning in school, recommending lists of books it is essential we read. He is amazed we haven't already read through all of Dostoevsky. He stops in mid-recommendation to tell my sister and I how exquisite we are, how proud he is of us, challenging anyone at the table, anyone in the world, to name girls more perfect than we. No matter who we are with, he has seldom been challenged. Even if he said nothing, the way his eyes regard us, dancing with adoration, would be enough. Individual adoration for who Abby and I are separately, for what we mean to him together.
Hi. Thank you all so much for coming as well. There. Thank you, Emily. Since my grandfather passed away, I've been thinking a lot about the different things I've missed. You know, we talked every day, sometimes multiple times a day, sometimes many times, multiple times a day, depending on, you know, what he was thinking. And we would see him every week. And, you know, I miss his jokes, and I miss trying to watch a Perry Mason with him every week as he would fall asleep and then say, no, I was paying attention. What happened? Obviously, I was just thinking of other things. And what I miss the most of all, though, is I think knowing someone who was really and completely fearless when it came to almost everything, and knowing that there was someone in the world that existed like that. Someone who was so optimistic that deep down everyone was as loving and as wonderful as he was. Everybody who knew my grandpa probably knew he was pretty fearless when it came to ideas. He would delve into any book to see if it appealed to him. And as I said at the memorial service in Waco, my freshman year of college, he was so eager to be part of my intellectual life that he asked for the college syllabi of every class I was taking, proceeded to read every book on the list, and then would call and quiz me, thus discovering that I had not, in fact, done quite as much reading as he had. But later, you know, even as I encountered kind of more radical thinkers, even as I came across people with whom he radically disagreed, he'd always give them a chance. And sometimes he even found some merit in them and would admit it. His fearlessness wasn't always a great attribute, as anyone who ever drove in a car with him can test, high speeds, U-turns. And one of his braver moments in my recollection was when my sister and I were really little. My grandfather wasn't exactly a domestic kind of guy. He agreed to watch Emily and I when we were about 7 and 9, somewhere in there. And, you know, my mom and grandmother were out of the country. My dad was out of town. And this was not a man who was used to he adored us. We were the most perfect girls in the world. But 2 days could be a challenge, even with perfection. And so we start to get hungry after the 2nd day of cereal. And I said, Grandpa, I just want something really good to eat. And my grandfather, because he's fearless and totally unafraid, says, we're going to have the greatest meal you could ever imagine tonight, I promise. And I was so excited. I said to Emily, oh, we're probably going to get some fancy food. Maybe he'll make a meal. What's going to happen? That would have been a little too courageous, even for my grandfather, I think, to step into the kitchen. But instead, we come home, and he says, we're going out. I'm thinking, this is going to be good. And we drive into the KFC, where he orders us a huge bucket of chicken each. And we just, and to this day, I don't think I've had a better meal. But on a more serious note, I think the thing I'll most about his fearlessness and his complete confidence was his kind of capacity and fearlessness around love, and not just of our family and not just of my grandmother and my dad and mom and everyone else, but also of everyone that he came across in the world. And it wasn't just that he was fearless, to say hi. It wasn't just that when we would walk down, I remember in Italy, and he would just shout out to whoever's out, "Buongiorno!" or try to speak whatever language. He wasn't much of a linguist, but he would kind of get the point across nonetheless. It wasn't just that he was fearless around talking to people. It was that he would talk to people who were grumpy. He would talk to people that were mean. I remember we were in a taxi cab with a man who was really not nice, and I was little and thinking, can we just get to the place and not try to find out his life story too, Grandpa? But Grandpa persisted, how is business? It's terrible. Well, do you have a family? Yes, we're not doing well. Everything was bad. But my grandpa persisted. It turned out he was an old labor guy. He'd fallen on hard times. My grandfather saw potential, kept at it. I think he's still at American Income Life Insurance Company. And since he's been gone, we've heard so many stories like that of people whose lives he touched, people we never even knew about. And I just want to share one last person. I would never have even known. The first night we went out after he passed away, we went to one of the great places for cuisine, El Conquistador in Waco, Texas. If you're passing through Waco, and who doesn't pass through Waco, you really should check it out. But we showed up, and the owner, who we know, came and gave his condolences. He'd sent us flowers. The waitress we always have came and gave us our condolences. We were very moved. But as we were leaving, this other guy ran out, who I'd seen in the back and hadn't ever seemed warm or friendly or frankly worth talking to, in my opinion at the time, came running out with just tears streaming down his face and told us that he hadn't known, he'd just found out, and that my grandfather meant so much to him, and he would have done anything for him, and how much he'll miss him. And it really made me think that, that fearlessness, that ability to try to get to know everyone and not be afraid that maybe they'll be grumpy at first or not so nice, to forgive anyone and not be afraid to give them a second chance, that those were kind of the things I will always miss about my grandfather and always appreciate in everyone else. And it makes me think that, my grandfather kind of taught me that, when you can love the world, when you assume that everyone will love you back. And I think everyone really did in his case. So thank you so much.
Audrey and Ron and Patricia, Abby and Emily, having just heard what I have, I'm convinced I have the hardest position in the entire lineup. I'm not sure how anyone tops that, and I think we could close after that. But I'm honored to be a part of this celebration. B sometimes would say to me that he always thought good friends were family that you made for yourself. By that definition, B was family. I loved him. And like so many in this room who had the same good fortune I did to call him family, he loved me. B was all about loyalty. There was nothing more important than loyalty to his family and each of us. If prosperity brings friends, adversity proves them. And B proved his friendship to me over and over and over again. It seemed to me that in many ways, his friendship was proportional to my adversity. Because the more trouble he thought you were in, the more he would call, the more he would ask what he could do, the more he wanted to help. One of those times for me was 2004. Before my last Senate race, B and his family wrote every check the law would allow. Every check. And after the election, when I felt like I'd been hit by a Mack truck, he called every single day. Sometimes twice a day. He called to offer me a job down in Waco, but he offered me a job. He called to tell me he was going to call others to offer me a job. He called to make me laugh. I remember once he said, Tom, during the campaign you were telling everybody you were 1 in a million. Now you're 1 in 10 million. You're unemployed. And I'm going to help you with it. Yates was right. I think of where my glory begins and ends. My glory is that I have such friends. My glory is that I reveled in B's friendship for 3 decades. Inspired by him, learning from him, admonished by him to remember all about social justice and helping those who didn't have enough. B was family, and I only miss him on days ending in Y.
Bernard Rapoport, an American original. We're here to celebrate his life, and boy, is that an easy life to celebrate. Horatio Alger, eat your heart out. B subtitled his autobiography, Capitalist with a Conscience. But I always thought of him as a man of passion, passionate about ideas, about reading, about his family, cared deeply about education, about justice, about Democrats, both small d and capital D. He wasn't one to go with the flow. You know, Jim Hightower's friend says even a dead fish can go with the flow. Bernard Rapoport was prepared to swim against the current when it came to the causes he believed in, against the war, for civil rights. As Texas turned Republican, he supported just about any Democrat with a pulse. He knew the importance of independent journalism, and he stood with Molly Ivins and the Texas Observer and Bill Moyers and the Nation magazine. He supported a bevy of independent think tanks and causes and campaigns. I was privileged to be one of those people who enjoyed that support, and I was privileged to consider him a friend. And of course, he adored my wife, Barbara Shaler. He delighted in reminding me that he had met her before I did in the McGovern years, in the McGovern campaign, saying that I was lucky that his heart had already been taken. He was pleased when she joined Hightower in the Fred Harris campaign, which in its rollicking, populist, high energy, was a lot like B, except it didn't have his savvy. He would always say, when he came here and held court in this hotel, now, Bob, when you're passing by Waco, stop by and see me. We've got to talk about how to help this country. Now, those of you who have gone from Washington to Waco, as many of you have, know you don't just drop by Waco. You have to want to get there. But it was always worth the trek. We'd meet in that office. He'd be behind the big desk, laden with books, articles. He'd share them, the most recent letter. We'd talk politics. We'd gossip. We'd plot a bit. And then often it was home to pick up Audrey, have a drink. Then with me, often to the Outback Steakhouse. And Audrey's wit at the dinner table would keep all those stories from getting too fabulous. He delighted in telling me about his father. Did I tell you my daddy was a communist? And the lessons he had learned from a childhood of hard poverty. And that upbringing brought him committed to the American dream, to the belief that every child should have the opportunity to get an education, to work hard, and to lift themselves up. In his later years, B moaned often about the rising inequality in this country, about, as the film said, the few having too much and the many having too little. He did not understand how a democracy could survive it. And long before Warren Buffett, he scorned a tax code that allowed him to pay lower taxes than working families. He didn't think that markets even worked if working people didn't get a fair shake. He always considered himself blessed, but we know he was our blessing. He once told me the story of Studs Terkel, who met a young woman in Southside Chicago sitting on a porch step and said to her, "What do you want in your life?" And she said, "I just wish some of it would come my way." Well, you know, B knew that poverty, and with his energy and his brilliance and his enthusiasm, he brought a hell of a lot of life his way. And then, with extraordinary generosity, he worked ceaselessly to make sure that the next generation of children would have an even greater opportunity. He was an original. He led a remarkable life. We will never forget him, and he's already missed.
To Audrey, to Ron and Patricia, Abby and Emily, I hope it is a comfort to you at this time that so many friends mourn your loss. I pray for you at this time, but as we come together today, it is with joy that we remember and will always remember B. Rapoport, your dear dad and grandfather. Every now and then, somebody comes along who has such humanity, such humility, who has such personal success and so much concern for others. Someone with a personality so enthusiastic, an intellect so great, a heart so large, that he has an impact on everyone. That was B. Rapoport. One word, and there are many, but one of the words that describes B is compassion. He had compassion, but he knew it was not a substitute for action. Indeed, by his actions, his words, and his deeds, he gave life and meaning to the very idea of compassion. It even affected the way his brain functioned. It was such a priority for him. With his compassion, he challenged our consciences and our courage. He lived the American dream, and he wanted everyone in America to do so as well. I'm so pleased that in the presentation that B is quoted saying something that I think there is probably no one in this room that hadn't heard him say. His mantra, that when too few have too much and too many have too little, we do not have a sustainable society. He would call all the time and say this every other call or every third call. It would begin with that. Don't they understand this in Washington? It was always amazing to him that people had such a high tolerance for the suffering of others without doing something about it. That statement that he made there was his mantra, it was an article of faith for him, and he acted upon his beliefs. Few Americans did more to create the sustainable society he talks about and a just world than B. Rapoport. He was an unabashed liberal. That seems like a modest, hardly goes far enough, who worked for justice around the world. Wherever there was a difficult challenge and a need for an innovative solution, he was there. He was honored on many occasions in the past decade. Well, you all remember, some of us all gathered when he came out with his book over 10 years ago, Being Rapoport, Capitalist with a Conscience. People rejoiced that he told his story in such a beautiful way. And at the celebration of his 90th birthday party in Washington and Dallas, to quote Bee's good friend, our former colleague, Chet Edwards, whom Bee adored, he said, Chet said at the service in Waco, how many people could have half the United States Senate attend his 90th birthday party? How many people could have the President of the United States, Secretary of State, Speaker Foley, 2 former speakers, so many members of Congress, Senate, and House, so many great friends here to honor him, so many more sending their regards. On one of the occasions when Bee was honored in Washington, D.C., I had the privilege of presenting to him, can you imagine this, the FDR Distinguished Public Service Award. People wondered if Bee was going to be able to show up that night because he had his ups and downs. Remember, Audrey wasn't sure, we weren't sure if he was going to be able to come, but nothing would keep him away from receiving the FDR Public Service Award. And he spoke about, you know what his speech was, about the same mantra we heard him say today and so much more. He was so much like the Roosevelts. It is said of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt that although they were born to privilege, they cared about the less fortunate because they had a burdensome conscience. B was not born to wealth, as we saw and we knew, but he worked hard, persevered, and achieved extraordinary success, financial and otherwise, most importantly, personally. With all that success, he always carried with him a burdensome conscience to ensure our country stayed true to its values, committed to justice, strong and prosperous with a thriving middle class, enabling everyone to live the American dream. With all that has been said about Bee and Audrey and their love of family, we all remember how it was impossible to interact with Bee without being uplifted. First of all, Abby and Emily, as you know, all he did was talk about you. Chet Edwards said at the funeral in Waco that even one time when he was on the phone with President Clinton, he said, "Excuse me, Mr. President, my granddaughter is calling." And that's really saying something, not because President Clinton was the President of the United States, but because he was one of these very, very dear friends, and he took great pride in that friendship. But Abby and Emily, we know how proud he was and still is of them. Anybody here who knew Bee, and we all did, knew that he made you feel as if you were his best friend. Who in this room is not Bee's best friend, right? He would put us all on a pedestal. He had confidence in our ability to do anything. Now, I know he was a proud Texan, but as a Californian, and when I think of Bee, I think of how he wanted us, he encouraged us all to reach our heights. And as a Californian, I think of him when it's an old song, so generationally this may not be understood, but there was a song that said, "Hooray for Hollywood," and it goes on and on and on. In it, it says, "Where you're terrific if you're only even good." Well, he made us think that we were terrific if we were only even good. Just so much enthusiasm, such generosity of spirit, such love. Hooray for B, for making us all believe that we were terrific. An extraordinary person, a great leader, a dear friend, most of all, a loving husband, father, grandfather. B. Rapoport will always be in our hearts and be special in our hearts. B's life was a blessing. As it is said in the Jewish tradition, we know B's memory will be a blessing for all of us, as he wanted us to know by the cover of the program. We have the message, B. Thank you for being so wonderful.
Audrey, Ron, Patricia, Abby, Emmy, President Clinton, Madam Secretary, and friends all of Audrey and B. Well, with the exception of Audrey and Ron, not the daughters, granddaughters, with the exception of Audrey and Ron, my earliest experiences with B predates anything you'll hear this evening. As a young man just out of the Navy, broke without anything to do in Des Moines, Iowa, and but with some friends in labor, I went to work as an insurance salesman for American Income Life Insurance. Now, I didn't know B then, of course. I was just way down. I was just a salesman, that's all. But truth be told, I was a lousy insurance salesman. So I quit and moved on. But later on, B and I used to kid about this. And it usually went this way, and this happened several times. Yeah, B, I worked for you. Yeah. He said, you worked for me. He said, but he said, you weren't very good at it. I said, B, yeah, but look at it this way. If I'd have stayed with you, you'd have gone bankrupt. And B had a great comment. He said, yeah, he says, a good thing you quit. I got rich and you got to be a senator. So that's my start with B. And a lot of stories in between. But last fall, last summer, Ben Barnes said, I was with him, and it was B's birthday. He said, call B, wish him a happy birthday, July 16th. And so I called him and wished him a happy birthday, and I said, well, B, I got to come down and see you sometime. He said, well, you got to come see me. I said, okay. In September, he called me up. Said, when are you going to come see me, Harkin? You always like to call me Harkin. I said, well, yeah, I'm going to do it, B. And so I got a trip set up in October. I flew into Dallas and drove down to Waco. And you're right, Bob, Waco's not a place you really go to. It's sort of out of the way. And then driving up to B and Audrey's house, I guess I really wasn't surprised to see this very modest middle-class home in a middle-class neighborhood in Waco, Texas. The first time I'd ever been there. It was a Sunday. We went in, and Audrey and B were in the den. We went in the den and sat down and started to have a nice visit. Now, before this, when B found out I was coming, he called Ben. He said, Ben, what's Harkin need? And Ben said, B, he's just coming to visit. Old times, just tell stories. Don't bring up money, B. I get in the den, I sit down. First thing B does, he leans over and he says, have I maxed out on you yet? Ben, how much can I give him? Well, Ben kind of scolded him and said, now, B, I told you don't bring up money. We're just here to have a nice visit. Well, which we did. And while I didn't go to El Conquistador, we did have a gourmet meal. By the way, Abby and Emmy showed up. We had pizza and root beer in the den. And just a great visit, reminiscing about old times. And speaking of money, B had a rule. I always called it B's rule of campaign giving. The more liberal you were, the more you got. I did all right. But Paul Wellstone beat me. B, of course, so many stories about B talking about his father coming over from Russia selling blankets on the streets of Waco. But he always said his father taught him three things. Always have a good book in your hand. Always protect the good name of your family. And never lose a sense of outrage at the injustice in the world. You think about that. That's the advice his father gave him. And you think about his life. Good books, you've heard all about the books. How many of us were the recipients of B's books at Christmas time, right? We always got one of B's books, always about some social injustice or some individual who was standing up for the underdog. They were great books. And he did his family name proud. The love of his life, Audrey. Proud he was of Ron, professor, author, William and Mary. And of course, Abby and Emmy. Of course, Abby the best because she went to Grinnell in Iowa. Emmy went to Oberlin, though, so that's okay. That's all right. But, and talk about never losing your sense of outrage at injustice in the world. How many, call you up. My sister would come in, Mr. Rapoport's on the phone, pick it up. Hey, B, that's all you'd say, hey, B, hearken, what are you doing? How come you're not doing something? This is an outrage. Do you see there's people out there, they're hungry, they're homeless, they're out of work. These Republicans are ruining the country. What are you going to do about it now? B, I just picked up the phone, give me a... And you try to say, well, B and I were working on this and working on that. And that just wasn't quite fast enough for him. Now, a couple of people have referred to his famous saying about too few people have too much money and too much power, and too few people and too many people have too little of it. There's a sequel to that, by the way, that he used to say. And it's the responsibility of free government to do something about it. It wasn't just to leave it that, but it was a responsibility of free government. And he always asked us, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? He was always impatient. So in a world in which we're told there are givers and takers, B was a great giver. He gave us his sense of outrage and impatience to create a better world. He gave, as I've said, to progressive candidates, even when they didn't have a chance of winning, he'd give them money. And he gave an example as a man of enormous courage and decency and integrity. What a great individual. We mourn his passing, but you think, what a great 94 years. And wouldn't you like to kind of somehow get that mold and make more of the B. Rapoports in the world today? What a different place it would be. John Kennedy was once asked how he'd like to be remembered, how he would like to be remembered. And he said that he thought that the highest accolade that could ever be given anyone would be to be remembered as a good and decent human being. So let's take that accolade. That is the highest accolade. And if that is the highest accolade, we can honestly say B. Rapoport was a good and decent human being.
So what I was going to do today, since I'm kind of batting cleanup, and what I fully intended to do was to bring all the books B ever sent me up here. But I haven't spent enough time in the weight room lately to do it. However, I do want you to know that on the way out, you will receive a test on the contents of those books. And Rapoport left the answers behind. You will all be graded. Abby, Emily, Patricia, Ron, wonderful Audrey, thank you. When Bee died, I sort of just wanted to amble down to Waco and sit in the back of the service and take it all in. And Audrey said, Bill, you spent 2/3 of your life taking help from him. Now you're going to do what he wanted you to do. You're going to show up in Washington and you're going to speak. And Hillary's coming too. I said, yes, ma'am. We'll be there. We met B. Rapoport when I was almost 26 and Hillary was almost 25, and we were still paying off law school debts, working for George McGovern in Texas. We got the living hell beat out of us. As a matter of fact, looking out on this crowd today, I believe that 50% of the votes George McGovern got in Texas are here in this room today. But B was always happy. I mean, man, I thought you were supposed to be lower lipped when you got your brains beat out. And he said, you know, if you're on our side, you're going to lose more than you win. You just keep pushing ahead. He spent a lifetime pushing rocks up a hill. And a lot of us, as Tom Daschle said so eloquently in his opening remarks, were those rocks. When I ran for Congress in 1974, I had zero name recognition, zero money. The guy I was running against had 85% approval. It was a good year for the Democrats, you remember? I got beat 51-48. I owed $44,000 in campaign debt. I still hadn't paid off my law school debts. First check I got on my debt, B. Rapoport. 17 times I was on the ballot in Arkansas and running for president when he could give me money. That's back when we still believed in public financing of presidential campaigns, so he got off the hook once I got the nomination. Every single time he was there. Just like for a lot of you, every single time he was there. Bob Borchardt said this, but I'd like to reiterate it. Another great Texas Jewish Democrat, Bob Strauss, who, thank God, is still with us, once said that the one thing every politician wants you to believe is that he was born in a log cabin he built himself. Well, for B. Rapoport, it was darn near true. I was so glad Tom Harkin talked about B and Audrey's home. I always loved going in there because the first thing you saw was not the hall of, the wall where all of us are with our signed pictures, thanks very much. It was a picture of his family coming in from Russia with the papers of their immigration. The guy never forgot his roots, and he was a self-made man, but he missed all the wisdom of the last 35 years that Washington's been spewing out. He didn't realize that as one of those job creators, he wasn't supposed to pay any taxes and that we'd all do better if he paid nothing. He actually was dumb enough to believe till his last day on earth that the job creators were the farmers and the shopkeepers and the middle-class workers who made enough money to buy a house, buy a car, buy a television set, and buy an American income policy. He actually thought that's what made the economy run. And he lived his life to try to give more people a chance to live that life. And he thought public service was a noble calling. And Chet Edwards lost in the tsunami of 2010. I thought we were going to have to bury him then, because he was his congressman and he loved him and he thought it was wrong. But within 48 hours, he was in a good humor again, thinking about what he was going to do. When I got beat in the Reagan landslide of 1980, he offered me a job. Tom, at least I had sense enough not to take it. I knew, you know, people that go into politics by definition don't understand insurance. I mean, so there's a reason we're here laughing. There was something so big and so good about him. He never gave up on his friends. If you got beat, he was always there for you. If you hit a bump in the road, he was always there for you. And he never gave up on anything he believed in, including Texas. Even now, he's in heaven waiting for the Democrats to return. And he did what he could to help. You know, in this decade, the last decade of his life, he and Audrey were giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in college scholarships, and all they asked for these scholarships they gave these kids was that they do community service as well as do their academic work. He just knew that if people saw enough about how other people had to live and put themselves on the line to help other people, the way you saw him with those little kids in that school, that it would change the way they thought about our community and our responsibilities to each other. Because he knew he couldn't actually speak to everybody or give them all a book, although he certainly tried. He graced us. And we all got 100 or 200 B. Rapoport stories, but I got to tell you this one. A couple of years after I left the White House, the ambassador of Saudi Arabia came to see me, and he said, the king is really working on trying to make a peace proposal, and I think that eventually he'll make one that basically says, if there's peace for the Palestinians, all the Arab states but Syria, which he couldn't control, would offer a full peace with Israel. And he wants to sort of build up to this by improving his relationships below the political level with Americans. So he wants you to bring a group to Saudi Arabia for 2 or 3 days, and he wants you to have it heavily weighted with American Jews. I said, have I got the people for you? I am not making this up. So I call Audrey and Bea, and of course they say they'll go, and they're, you know, in their mid-80s or something. And first we're flying over in the airplane. And all the young people who are with me know that I love to play games, I play cards. So we're playing with this a long flight, and these kids are literally dropping out. They're literally fainting, falling asleep, and Bea's still dealing the cards. And we get there, and we all go around and see all this stuff. We go from Jeddah, then we went up to Riyadh, and, you know, the old pre-oil Saudi palace is there. And it's basically a mud palace. It's amazing what they did with basically the materials they had before they could afford to bring in marble. And so at one point, I had to go do one of those meetings, the equivalent of when you're in other cultures of gray-haired white guys in suits meetings that are interminably boring, but you got to do it and check the box. So I was doing that, and everybody on our tour got to do things. They had choices about what they did. Bea and Audrey took camels across the Arabian desert. Bea of Arabia. Here's this 84-year-old guy whipping this camel across the Arabian desert saying, "Long live Israel," you know? Well, it was an utterly incredible sight. I will never forget it as long as I live. Neither will the Saudis. I thought to myself, if we just named him our envoy for the peace process, within 3 or 4 months, he'd have a deal, or they'd all die of exhaustion. It was the spark of life that never dimmed that we loved most. He was gifted with a great mind. He loved all those books. He read all those books. He would call and test me on those books. And I went back and reread Being Rapoport after he passed away. And I was howling at all the stuff he put in there about our long friendship. And I was feeling grateful about the support he gave to me and to Hillary and what a great friend he was. But most of all, I was feeling grateful that he missed the message of the last 35 years. He just never got it that he was a job creator and therefore entitled to shoulder no responsibilities for the common weal. That he was supposed to be an economic mechanism only, that if he just had zero taxes and no responsibility for the poor kids in the world and no responsibility for the middle class in the world, poof, everything would be wonderful. He knew better. And he had been on the bottom. He had worked his way to the top. And as he said, he didn't get rich overnight. It was a 50-year enterprise. But he never stopped being who he was. He was a thoroughly modern man with very old-fashioned ideas about our common life. He was a gift, uncommon in the life of our long country. A gift he gave to all of us and to many thousands of others, including all those little kids that had no idea really who he was or what he was about, that you saw in the movie and those they represent, and all those kids in the University of Texas system, and everyone else who was ever blessed to know him. We should be happy today. Gardner Taylor, who's still alive at 95, one of the greatest ministers in the history of the United States, said, God did not send us here to stay. God sent us here to live. So our friend's stay is over. Those of us who remain behind should nurture his gift because he gave it to us every day with all he had. Thank you.
So you've heard these extraordinary tributes to an authentic American hero. Think about it for a moment. B. Rapoport's life spanned significantly more than a third of the history of our nation. Really something extraordinary. And he made this nation a better place, and he made our lives better, and made us better people. As we go now to the closing prayers of this gathering, let me just mention two things about B. We've talked about what he meant to so many of the most important figures in America and to so many of the most urgent moral causes of America. I just want to add what he meant to average people, not just the ones who work for him. So I want to tell you 90 seconds of B's life. I do not exaggerate one word of what I described. We're walking into the club in Waco. The doorman says, B, that you made it possible to send my child to college is a blessing of his life. He loves the University of Texas. We make it to the table, and he sits down, and one of the members of the club said, B, I don't know how you did it. I had tried for a month. My wife got an appointment with the surgeon, and the surgery will take place in just 2 weeks. He doesn't leave before a woman who had obviously been waiting to come up and said, B, I can't tell you what it meant that my grandson got that job. I looked at him. I said, B, did you pay people to say this to you? This was B. Rapoport. It wasn't just the great figures and the great causes. It was anyone who needed help that he was able to help. He did it. For me at the Religious Action Center, we feel it every day. B was a proud Jew. He believed that he and his family lived out their Jewish identity and their Jewish ideals by doing the work of social justice. He truly believed that in the depths of his soul, that Jews were called to be a light to the nations. And he was proud to be part of that. The Audrey and B. Rapoport seminars for high school students that he forced us to nearly triple in size have now trained nearly 40,000 young Jews all across America who keep that flame of social justice burning brightly. And one last thing. When you listen to all of this, it seems to me that there is one message above all that B has taught us, and which we leave with as his gift to us. In an age of cynicism, at a time when we face such daunting challenges, B's life and his message is clear. We are not the prisoners of a bitter and unremitting past. We can be, we must be, we will be the shapers of a better and more hopeful future. That is the blessing of B's life and the blessing of our lives, that we will make that better future for our nation and for all God's children throughout the world. In that spirit, we turn to the words of the Jewish tradition as I ask you now, if you can, to rise. First, as I read the traditional memorial prayer, the El Mole Rachamim prayer in Hebrew, and then ask you to join me in English, and then ask you to join the family, if you are able, in the words of the Kaddish, the prayer of sanctification, which in remembering those who have died, never once acknowledges death, but rather is filled with praise for God and hope for the future. El mole rachamim shochein bamromim hamsei menucha nuchot tachat kanfei hashkina im kedoshim utaorim kezoharar kira mazhirim et nishmat Baruch ben David Bariva Shalacho olamo ba'al harachamim yastirehu beseter kanafav laolamim v'yitzror bitzror hachayim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach bashalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen. We read together. Here. We read together in the prayer, compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Bernard, son of David and Riva, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. We say the words of the Kaddish, Yit gadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, bi'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yamechon, uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kori v'miru. Amen. Yehi shemei rabbah mavorach le'olam olmei almaya. Yit barach v'yit tabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit roman v'yit naseh v'yit hadar v'yit halel v'yit halal shemei rechudasha b'richu le'ela min chol berchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata da'am yiran bi'alma v'miru. Amen. Yehi shlomo rabba min shamayim v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, V'imru, Amen. And let us read together, glorified and sanctified be God's great name throughout the world. which he has created according to his will, and establish his kingdom in your lifetime and during your days. And may his great name be blessed and exalted, extolled and honored, adored and lauded, be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, beyond all blessings and hymns, praises and consolations that are ever spoken in the world, and let us say amen. May there be abundant peace from heaven and life for us and for all Israel, and let us say amen. B wrote at the very end of his book, I don't worry about death. I'm not concerned about my personal immortality. When alluding to immortality, I'm always reminded of an interview with Abraham Joshua Heschel. The question to the rabbi was, what do you think your mission on earth is? The rabbi quickly responded, to do God's work on earth. When asked about the hereafter, the rabbi responded, I am so busy doing God's work on earth that I will let God worry about that. Conclude with the words of the poet. If I should die and leave you here a while, be not like others soon undone, who keep long vigil in the silent dusk and weep. For my sake, turn now to life again and smile, nerving thy heart and trembling hand to do something to comfort weaker hearts than thine. Complete those dear, unfinished tasks of mine, and I perchance may therein comfort you. That was B's blessing it. As we go forth, let it be the blessing of our lives.